The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves through the windows of Master Chen's Karate Academy in suburban Detroit, Michigan. It was October 1978, and the dojo buzzed with the energy of dedicated martial artists preparing for the upcoming regional tournament. The hardwood floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the sound of bare feet shuffling across the polished surface mixed with the sharp exhales of focused practitioners. 25-year-old Marcus Thompson stood at the center of the main training area, his black belt tied perfectly around his muscular waist. His kicks sliced through the air with precision, each movement calculated and powerful. Marcus had earned his black belt just 6 months prior, but his arrogance had grown faster than his skill. He believed himself destined for greatness, convinced that the upcoming Michigan State Karate Championships would be his stepping stone to national recognition. The dojo reflected the era's karate boom perfectly, inspired by the growing popularity of martial arts in America following the return of servicemen from overseas. Master Chen had opened his academy in 1973. The walls displayed certificates from various tournaments, photographs of students receiving their belts, and traditional Japanese calligraphy emphasizing honor, respect, and discipline. A large American flag hung beside the Japanese flag, symbolizing the fusion of Eastern tradition with American determination. Marcus completed his kata with a thunderous kiai that echoed through the training hall. Several junior students stopped their own practice to watch, clearly impressed by his technical prowess. He noticed their attention and allowed himself a satisfied smile. At 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and the confidence that came from countless hours of training, Marcus cut an imposing figure in his crisp white gi. "Excellent form." "Marcus!" called out Master Chen from across the dojo. The 60-year-old instructor approached with measured steps, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. Chen had studied under some of the first Japanese masters to teach in America during the 1950s, and his knowledge of traditional techniques was encyclopedic. "Your reverse punch has improved significantly since last month's testing." Marcus bowed respectfully, though his chest swelled with pride at the praise. "Thank you, Sensei. I have been practicing the kata daily, focusing on the breathing techniques you demonstrated." He straightened his shoulders, adding with barely concealed excitement, "I believe I am ready to represent our dojo at the state championships next month." The other students continued their training around them, the younger ones working on basic stances while the more advanced practitioners sparred under the supervision of senior students. The familiar sounds of martial arts training filled the air, the snap of GI fabric, the thud of controlled strikes against focus mitts, and the occasional correction from an instructor. This was the golden age of American karate, when dojos like Master Chen's were spreading across the country and tournaments were becoming increasingly popular. Master Chen nodded thoughtfully, his dark eyes studying his student's face. "Skill in technique is important, Marcus, but remember what we have discussed about the spirit of karate. The greatest champions possess not only physical ability, but also humility and respect for others. These qualities separate true martial artists from mere fighters." "Of course, Sensei," Marcus replied, though his tone suggested he considered such lessons secondary to his physical preparation. He glanced toward the large mirror that covered one wall of the dojo, admiring his reflection and the way his muscled frame filled out his karate uniform. In his mind, he was already visualizing himself standing atop the winner's podium, holding a golden trophy while photographers captured his moment of triumph. As the evening training session continued, Marcus moved through various combinations with fluid precision. His side kicks rose to head height without effort. His punches created sharp snapping sounds as they cut through the air, and his footwork demonstrated the hours of dedication he had invested in his training. Other students occasionally paused to observe his techniques, and he made sure to execute his most impressive moves when he noticed their attention. The dojo's atmosphere reflected the era's unique blend of Eastern philosophy and American ambition. Motivational posters featuring famous martial artists lined the walls alongside traditional Japanese artwork. The smell of incense from the small shrine near the entrance mixed with the practical aroma of athletic sweat and floor wax. This was 1978, when karate had firmly established itself in American culture, but still retained much of its mystique and traditional elements. Near the back of the training area, an older man in maintenance coveralls quietly swept the floors around the edges of the practice space. His movements were methodical and unobtrusive, designed not to interfere with the students' training. Most of the martial artists barely noticed his presence, having grown accustomed to seeing him maintain the facility's cleanliness during their evening sessions. The janitor's name was Robert Washington, though few people in the dojo bothered to learn it. At 58 years old, he had worked various maintenance jobs throughout Detroit for most of his adult life. His graying hair was always neatly trimmed, and despite his humble occupation, he carried himself with quiet dignity. Robert had been cleaning the dojo for nearly 2 years, arriving each evening as classes began and working silently around the students until they departed. Marcus noticed the janitor emptying wastebaskets near the changing area and felt a momentary irritation at the distraction. In his focused state of mind, preparing for what he considered his breakthrough tournament, any interruption seemed unwelcome. He completed another series of kicks and glanced again toward Robert, who continued his methodical cleaning routine with practiced efficiency. The evening's training session approached its conclusion as Master Chen called the students to attention for the traditional closing ceremony. They formed neat rows facing the front of the dojo, where the flags and Master Chen's portrait of his own teacher hung with reverence. The ritual had remained unchanged since the dojo's opening, connecting these American students to centuries of martial arts tradition. "Before we close tonight's practice," Master Chen announced, his voice carrying clearly through the training hall, "I want to remind everyone about the upcoming state championships. This tournament represents an opportunity not only to test our skills, but to demonstrate the character of our dojo. Remember that how we conduct ourselves outside these walls reflects upon all of us." Marcus felt his heart race with anticipation as he thought about the tournament just weeks away. In his mind, this would be the beginning of his rise to martial arts stardom, the first step toward becoming a recognized champion in the rapidly growing world of American karate competition. The following Tuesday evening brought with it the crisp autumn chill that marked late October in Detroit. Marcus Thompson arrived at Master Chen's dojo 30 minutes early, as had become his routine since receiving confirmation of his acceptance into the Michigan State Karate Championships. The tournament was now less than 3 weeks away, and every training session felt crucial to his preparation. The familiar sounds of Detroit's industrial activity hummed in the distance as he unlocked his car and gathered his gear bag from the trunk. Inside the dojo, the overhead lights cast their bright glow across the polished hardwood floors, creating an atmosphere of focused intensity that Marcus had grown to love. The space felt different when empty, more sacred somehow, as if the accumulated energy of thousands of training sessions lingered in the air. He bowed respectfully toward the front of the dojo, where Master Chen's certificates and the flags hung in silent testimony to the martial arts tradition they represented. Marcus began his warm-up routine with methodical precision, starting with gentle stretching exercises that gradually increased in intensity. His body responded eagerly to the familiar movements, muscles that had been tensed from his day job at the automotive parts factory, slowly relaxing into the fluid motions of martial arts preparation. The 1970s had been boom years for Detroit's automobile industry, and Marcus's steady paycheck from the factory allowed him to pursue his karate dreams without financial stress. As he moved through his stretching routine, Marcus noticed Robert Washington entering through the rear entrance that led to the maintenance area. The older man wore his usual grey coveralls and carried his cleaning supplies with the same quiet efficiency that had marked his presence in the dojo for nearly 2 years. Robert nodded politely in Marcus's direction before beginning his evening routine of emptying wastebaskets and preparing cleaning equipment. Marcus found himself momentarily irritated by the distraction. In his mind, the dojo should be a place reserved for serious martial artists, not cluttered with the mundane concerns of building maintenance. He had worked hard to earn his place among the advanced students, and the presence of someone performing such menial tasks felt somehow diminishing to the sacred nature of his training environment. Have the training space completely to himself during these crucial preparation sessions. Robert worked with the same quiet competence he brought to all his duties, positioning his stepladder carefully and replacing each bulb with practiced ease. His movements displayed the kind of body awareness that came from years of physical training, though this detail continued to escape Marcus's notice. To the young martial artist, Robert remained simply a maintenance worker whose presence was tolerated rather than acknowledged. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Robert offered politely as he descended from the stepladder after replacing the final bulb. "I see you are here early for additional training. The tournament must be approaching soon." His voice carried genuine interest in Marcus's preparation. though the young man interpreted the comment as mere small talk from someone who could not possibly understand the significance of competitive martial arts. Marcus paused in his stretching routine, looking up from where he sat in a split position that demonstrated his exceptional flexibility. Yes, the state championships are in 2 weeks. I have been training extensively to ensure I am properly prepared. His tone carried the condescending patience he might use when explaining complex topics to a child, clearly not expecting Robert to comprehend the technical aspects of tournament competition. "That is quite an accomplishment, qualifying for state-level competition," Robert replied, beginning to pack away his maintenance supplies. "You must have trained for many years to reach such a high level of skill. The dedication required for black belt ranking is considerable." His words showed respect for Marcus's achievement, though they also carried subtle undertones that suggested deeper knowledge than his humble position might indicate. The compliment fed Marcus's ego while reinforcing his belief in his own superiority. He stood and began his kata practice, executing the complex sequence of movements with the precision that had earned him recognition as one of Master Chen's most technically proficient students. Each technique flowed seamlessly into the next, his breathing controlled and his focus intense as he visualized defeating imaginary opponents. Robert finished organizing his equipment, but remained in the dojo longer than necessary, quietly observing Marcus's practice from a respectful distance. His trained eye catalogued details that most observers would miss. The slight tension in Marcus's shoulders that indicated underlying stress, the way his stance shifted imperceptibly during complex transitions, and the breathing patterns that revealed his current level of conditioning. What impressed Robert most was Marcus's obvious dedication to perfection. The young man repeated difficult sections multiple times, adjusting his technique based on how each movement felt and looked in the mirror. His work ethic was undeniable, and his technical skills had clearly been developed through countless hours of disciplined practice. Yet Robert also noticed character traits that concerned him as an observer of human nature. "Your form is quite impressive," Robert commented during a brief pause in Marcus's practice. "I can see why Master Chen has such confidence in your tournament preparation. The precision of your techniques suggests many years of dedicated study." His observation was both accurate and respectful, acknowledging the obvious skill that Marcus displayed during his training session. Marcus accepted the praise as his due, though something in Robert's tone sparked a moment of curiosity. The janitor spoke with the kind of technical vocabulary that seemed inconsistent with his humble occupation, using terms like form and technique that suggested familiarity with martial arts training. However, Marcus quickly dismissed this observation, convinced that Robert had simply overheard instructors using such terminology during classes. "Thank you," Marcus replied, though his attention had already returned to his training routine. "I have been studying karate for over 5 years now, and I believe my preparation for this tournament has been thorough. Master Chen has helped me develop the technical foundation necessary for success at the state level." His words carried the confidence of someone who had never experienced significant defeat in martial arts. "Competition," Robert nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the mixture of genuine skill and dangerous overconfidence that characterized Marcus's approach to competition. In his years of observing martial artists, he had seen many talented individuals derailed by their inability to maintain proper humility alongside technical development. Pride, he knew from experience, could destroy even the most gifted practitioners. As Marcus resumed his kata practice, Robert completed his morning duties and prepared to leave the dojo until his evening cleaning schedule. However, he found himself lingering longer than usual, fascinated by the contrast between Marcus's undeniable physical abilities and his obvious character flaws. The young man represented both the best and worst aspects of modern American martial arts. Training. The morning training session continued with Marcus working through various aspects of his tournament preparation. He practiced his required kata repeatedly, focusing on the subtle details that might distinguish his performance from other competitors. He also spent time on sparring combinations, shadowboxing against imaginary opponents while maintaining perfect technical form. During one particularly intense sequence, Marcus executed a series of high kicks, followed by rapid-fire hand techniques that demonstrated impressive coordination and conditioning. The combination concluded with a powerful reverse punch that created a sharp snapping sound as it cut through the air. His breathing remained controlled throughout the sequence, and his balance never wavered despite the complexity of the movements. Robert watched this display with the kind of analytical attention that Marcus would have found surprising if he had noticed it. The older man's eyes tracked the subtle details of stance, timing, and power generation that revealed both strengths and weaknesses in Marcus's technique. While impressed by the young martial artist's physical capabilities, Robert also identified areas where improvement was possible. "That was an excellent combination," Robert offered, as Marcus paused to catch his breath. "Your timing and coordination are quite impressive. I imagine such techniques require years of practice to execute with that level of precision." His comment was both accurate and encouraging, though it also contained the kind of technical insight that should have seemed unusual coming from a janitor. Marcus felt a moment of confusion at Robert's specific technical observations, but quickly rationalized them as the comments of someone who had watched many karate classes over his years of employment at the dojo. He accepted the praise while maintaining his assumption that Robert's understanding of martial arts remained superficial at best, limited to what any observant person might notice after months of watching training sessions. As the morning progressed toward the time when regular weekend classes would begin, Marcus concluded his private training session with a final run-through of his tournament kata. His execution was flawless, each movement sharp and precise, his breathing perfectly coordinated with the rhythm of the form. The performance would have impressed any qualified judge, and Marcus felt confident that his technical preparation was complete. Robert had finished his maintenance duties but remained in the dojo, organizing supplies in the storage closet while continuing to observe Marcus's training. Something about the young man's attitude troubled him, though he could not immediately articulate his concerns. The combination of genuine skill and dangerous arrogance created a volatile mixture that experienced martial artists recognized as potentially destructive. As other students began arriving for the morning class, Marcus gathered his training gear with obvious satisfaction. His preparation session had gone well, and he felt increasingly confident about his chances at the state championships. The young martial artist exchanged casual greetings with fellow students while maintaining the slightly superior attitude that had become his trademark since earning his black belt. Robert completed his morning work and prepared to leave the dojo, his observations of Marcus's character and technique stored away for future reference. As he gathered his supplies and headed toward the exit, he reflected on the patterns he had witnessed in martial arts students over the years. Some learned genuine humility alongside physical techniques, while others allowed success to corrupt their character in ways that ultimately limited their growth. November 4th, 1978, dawned crisp and clear across Michigan, with autumn's final breath bringing temperatures that hovered just above freezing. The Michigan State Karate Championships were being held at the Lansing Community College Gymnasium, a spacious facility that had been transformed into a martial arts competition venue, complete with multiple fighting areas, judges' tables, and bleacher seating for spectators. Marcus Thompson arrived at the tournament site 3 hours before his scheduled competition time, his black equipment bag slung over his shoulder and his confidence radiating from every step. He had spent the previous week tapering his training, focusing on mental preparation while maintaining his physical conditioning at peak levels. The drive from Detroit to Lansing had given him time to visualize his performances, running through his kata and sparring strategies with the methodical precision that characterized his approach to competition. Pushing such thoughts aside, Marcus continued his preparation, moving into the dynamic stretching exercises that would prepare his muscles for the demanding training session ahead. His legs swung in wide arcs, his arms rotated in broad circles, and his spine twisted through its full range of motion. Each movement was executed with the precision that had earned him praise from Master Chen and the admiration of junior students. Other students began arriving as the official start time approached. Sarah Martinez, a brown belt who had been training for 3 years, entered with her characteristic quiet determination. Behind her came David Kim, a green belt whose enthusiasm sometimes exceeded his technical skill, but whose dedication impressed even the most experienced practitioners. The evening's class would include roughly 15 students of various ranks, creating the diverse training environment that Master Chen preferred. Robert continued his cleaning routine along the edges of the training area, his movements careful and unobtrusive. He had learned through experience exactly how to maintain the facility while respecting the students' need for uninterrupted practice space. His broom moved in smooth, quiet strokes, and he emptied trash receptacles with practiced efficiency that minimized any disruption to the martial artists. Master Chen arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, as was his unwavering custom. The elderly instructor's presence immediately transformed the casual atmosphere into one of focused attention. Students quickly formed neat rows facing the front of the dojo, their conversations ending as they prepared for the traditional opening ceremony that began every training session. "Good evening, students," Master Chen announced, his voice carrying clearly through the training hall. "Tonight we will focus on tournament preparation for those competing next month, while continuing foundation work for our junior students. Remember that every technique we practice must embody the principles of karate, respect, discipline, and continuous self-improvement." The opening ceremony proceeded with its familiar rhythm of bows and brief meditation. Marcus felt his anticipation building as he contemplated the evening's training ahead. In his mind, each session brought him closer to the championship performance he envisioned, where his name would be announced as the winner in front of hundreds of spectators. As the formal training began, Marcus threw himself into the prescribed exercises with intense focus. His kicks reached impressive heights, his punches created sharp snapping sounds as they cut through the air, and his stances demonstrated the stability that came from months of dedicated conditioning. Other students occasionally glanced in his direction, clearly impressed by the power and precision of his techniques. During a brief water break between exercises, Marcus noticed Robert cleaning near the equipment storage area. The janitor was carefully wiping down the wooden weapons rack, ensuring that the training tools remained clean and properly maintained. Something about the older man's methodical approach to such simple tasks struck Marcus as indicative of a limited mindset, someone content with menial work rather than pursuing greater achievements. "Must be nice to have such simple responsibilities," Marcus commented to David Kim, nodding toward Robert. His voice carried clearly in the quiet dojo, loud enough for several other students to hear. "Just push a broom around, empty some trash cans, collect a paycheck. No pressure, no goals to achieve, no standards to meet." David shifted uncomfortably at the comment, glancing toward Robert to see if the older man had heard. Several other students exchanged uncertain looks, unsure how to respond to Marcus's unprovoked criticism of someone who had always been respectful and unobtrusive in his work around the dojo. Robert continued his cleaning without any visible reaction to Marcus's words. His movements remained steady and methodical, showing no sign that he had heard the disparaging comments. Years of working in various environments had taught him to focus on his responsibilities, rather than responding to every thoughtless remark he encountered. "I mean, look at him," Marcus continued, warming to his theme as he noticed the attention his comments were drawing from fellow students. "Middle-aged guy pushing a mop around a karate school. That's what happens when you don't set high standards for yourself. When you're content with mediocrity instead of striving for excellence like we do here." Sarah Martinez frowned at Marcus's words, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of his commentary. "He's just doing his job," she said quietly. "There's nothing wrong with honest work, and he's always been respectful to all of us." Marcus waved dismissively at her comment. "Sure, honest work is fine, but where's the ambition? Where's the drive to become something more than a janitor? That's the difference between people like us, who push ourselves to achieve martial arts excellence, and people like him, who are satisfied with scraping by at the bottom." Master Chen called the students back to formation before the conversation could continue further, but Marcus felt satisfied with his observations. In his mind, he was simply stating obvious truths about the importance of setting high goals and working hard to achieve them. The upcoming tournament represented everything he valued: competition, excellence, and the opportunity to prove his superiority over less dedicated practitioners. The remainder of the training session proceeded normally, with students working through various combinations and sparring exercises. Marcus continued to demonstrate impressive technical skill, his movements sharp and powerful as he prepared for the championship competition that dominated his thoughts. Each technique he executed felt like a step closer to the recognition he believed he deserved. Robert finished his cleaning duties and quietly departed through the rear entrance. His presence in the dojo concluded for another evening. He had completed his responsibilities with the same professional efficiency he brought to every shift, maintaining the facility's cleanliness while respecting the students' training environment. As the evening's session concluded with the traditional closing ceremony, Marcus felt energized by his preparation progress. The tournament was approaching rapidly, and he could visualize himself performing flawlessly under the pressure of competition. In his mind, victory was not just possible but inevitable, given his superior training and natural talent for martial arts. The third week of October brought an unexpected chill to Detroit. With frost covering the windows of Master Chen's dojo on the morning of Saturday, October 21st, 1978. The Michigan State Karate Championships were now only 2 weeks away, and the intensity of training had reached fever pitch among the dojo's competitive members. Marcus Thompson arrived earlier than usual, determined to perfect his tournament kata in the quiet hours before the regular weekend classes began. The dojo felt different in the early morning silence. Without the usual sounds of multiple students training simultaneously, every footstep and breath seemed amplified. The autumn sunlight streaming through the windows created long shadows across the polished hardwood floors, giving the training space an almost sacred quality that reminded practitioners why they had originally been drawn to the martial arts. Marcus changed into his training uniform, with the ritualistic precision he had developed over months of preparation. His black belt, still relatively new but worn with obvious pride, was tied with the perfect knot his instructor had taught him. The young martial artist had spent considerable time researching the backgrounds of likely competitors for the state championships, studying their techniques through tournament footage when available, and networking with other instructors to gather intelligence. His confidence had grown steadily throughout his preparation period. Marcus genuinely believed that his combination of natural athleticism, intensive training, and technical precision would carry him to victory in the black belt division. In quiet moments, he fantasized about the recognition that would follow a state championship title, imagining magazine interviews and invitations to train with famous martial artists. As Marcus began his warm-up routine, he noticed that Robert Washington had arrived even earlier than usual to complete some maintenance work. The older man was methodically replacing burned-out fluorescent bulbs in the overhead fixtures, his movements efficient and purposeful despite the mundane nature of the task. Marcus found the janitor's presence mildly irritating, preferring to. The gymnasium buzzed with activity as competitors from across Michigan warmed up in designated areas, their varied uniforms representing dozens of different karate schools and styles. The atmosphere reflected the golden age of American karate tournaments, when regional competitions served as proving grounds for martial artists seeking recognition at state and national levels. The sound of striking pads mixed with the sharp exhalations of kata practice, creating the familiar symphony of serious martial arts preparation. Marcus found the registration table and confirmed his entries in both individual kata and kumite divisions for black belt competitors. His heart rate elevated slightly as he reviewed the competitor list, recognizing several names from previous tournaments and noting new challenges he had not encountered before. The black belt division included 23 competitors, making it one of the largest fields in recent Michigan championship history. After completing his registration paperwork, Marcus located the warm-up area designated for his school and began his pre-competition routine. He moved through basic techniques with fluid precision, his muscle memory guiding each movement while his mind focused on the mental aspects of competition. Other competitors occasionally glanced in his direction, noting his technical proficiency and obvious preparation level. The tournament format followed the standard structure for 1970s karate competitions, with kata and kumite as separate events judged by panels of certified black belt officials. Kata competitors would be evaluated on technical accuracy, power, rhythm, and demonstration of bunkai understanding, while kumite matches followed controlled contact rules designed to demonstrate technique and timing rather than causing injury to opponents. Master Chen arrived with several other students from the dojo, providing moral support and last-minute technical guidance for his competitors. He observed Marcus's warm-up routine with the analytical eye of an experienced instructor, noting both the physical readiness and psychological state of his student. While impressed by Marcus's technical preparation, Chen remained concerned about the young man's attitude and its potential impact on his performance. Remember what we have discussed about maintaining proper mental state during competition, Master Chen advised during a quiet moment between Marcus's warm-up sets. Technical skill alone does not guarantee victory. The competitor who maintains composure and demonstrates proper character often defeats more physically gifted opponents who lack mental discipline. His words carried the wisdom of decades spent observing martial arts. Competition at various levels. Marcus nodded respectfully. At his instructor's guidance, though his attention was primarily focused on observing potential opponents and assessing their apparent skill levels, he felt confident that his technical preparation exceeded that of most competitors, and his mental state remained focused on achieving the victory he had visualized throughout months of intensive training. The first divisions began competition with junior competitors, creating an opportunity for black belt participants to observe the judging panel's preferences and scoring tendencies. Marcus studied the officials carefully, noting which techniques and presentation styles seemed to receive higher scores. This analytical approach to competition reflected his methodical personality and desire to optimize every aspect of his performance. As the morning progressed toward the black belt divisions, Marcus's confidence continued to build. His warm-up sessions had gone smoothly. His techniques felt sharp and powerful, and his mental focus remained clear and determined. The young martial artist genuinely believed that this tournament would mark the beginning of his rise to regional and eventually national recognition in karate competition. During a break between divisions, Marcus noticed several competitors from other schools discussing strategy and sharing observations about the competition format. However, his natural arrogance prevented him from participating in these conversations, as he considered such collaboration beneath someone of his caliber. This isolation reinforced his self-perception as superior to his fellow competitors. The kata competition began with lower-ranked black belts, allowing Marcus to observe the judging criteria and scoring patterns before his own performance. He watched each competitor with analytical intensity, cataloging their strengths and weaknesses while comparing their technical abilities to his own. In every case, he concluded that his preparation and natural talent would prove superior. When his name was called for kata competition, Marcus stepped onto the competition area with the confident stride of someone who expected to dominate. He bowed respectfully to the judging panel and announced his selected kata, a complex form that would showcase his technical skills and athletic ability. The gymnasium fell quiet as spectators focused their attention on his performance. Marcus executed his kata with the precision he had developed through months of intensive practice. Each technique flowed seamlessly into the next. His power generation was impressive, and his balance remained perfect throughout the complex sequence of movements. The performance was technically flawless and demonstrated the hours of dedication he had invested in his preparation. However, as Marcus concluded his kata and bowed to the judges, something in their expressions suggested that his performance had not achieved the impact he had expected. The scores, when announced, placed him in 4th position out of the first group of competitors, a result that shocked him and contradicted his confident expectations. His technical excellence had been evident, but something intangible had been missing from his presentation. The realization that his kata performance had fallen short of his expectations created the first crack in Marcus's tournament confidence. He had executed every technique correctly, demonstrated impressive physical ability, and maintained perfect form throughout the performance. Yet the judges had clearly seen something lacking in his presentation, something that prevented him from achieving the scores his technical skills should have earned. As Marcus moved toward the staging area for kumite competition, his mind raced to understand what had gone wrong with his kata performance. The technical aspects had been flawless, his conditioning was superior to most competitors, and his preparation had been thorough. The disconnect between his self-assessment and the judges' scoring created confusion and frustration that began to affect his mental state. Master. Chen approached his student with the careful demeanor of an instructor who recognized potential trouble. Your technique was excellent, Marcus, he offered supportively. However, remember that judges evaluate more than physical ability. The spirit and character displayed during kata performance carries significant weight in scoring. Consider this feedback as you prepare for kumite competition. The advice troubled Marcus because it implied that his character presentation had been inadequate, a possibility he had never seriously considered. In his mind, his technical superiority should have been sufficient to earn top scores, and the suggestion that judges evaluated intangible qualities seemed like an excuse for what he considered unfair scoring. As the kumite division prepared to begin, Marcus found himself in an unfamiliar mental state. For the first time in his competitive career, he faced the possibility that his confidence might have been misplaced, that his preparation might have been incomplete in ways he had not anticipated. The young martial artist would soon discover whether his physical skills could overcome the character deficiencies that had apparently cost him points in kata. Competition. The Kumite division of the Michigan State Karate Championships began with the methodical precision that characterized organized martial arts competition in 1978. Marcus Thompson stood in the staging area, his mind still reeling from his disappointing fourth-place finish in kata competition. The confusion and frustration from that unexpected result had created cracks in his previously unshakable confidence, though he refused to acknowledge the possibility that his preparation might have been inadequate. Marcus observed the early Kumite matches with analytical intensity, studying the fighting styles and strategies of potential opponents while attempting to regain his psychological equilibrium. The controlled contact format required competitors to demonstrate technique, timing, and distance without causing injury to their opponents, emphasizing skill over brute force in ways that reflected traditional martial arts values. The tournament officials called his name for the first round of elimination matches, and Marcus stepped onto the competition area with forced confidence. His opponent was a stocky martial artist from Grand Rapids, whose unorthodox style and aggressive approach immediately challenged Marcus's expectations of how the match should unfold. The referee positioned both competitors and signaled the beginning of the bout. Marcus attempted to establish his preferred fighting distance and rhythm, using the long-range techniques that had served him well in training. However, his opponent's unrelenting forward pressure and unpredictable combinations disrupted every strategy Marcus tried to implement. The Grand Rapids fighter scored repeatedly with close-range techniques, while Marcus struggled to adapt his game plan. Despite his technical skills and superior conditioning, Marcus found himself overwhelmed by an opponent whose fighting spirit and tactical flexibility exceeded his own rigid approach to competition. The match concluded with a decisive victory for the Grand Rapids fighter, eliminating Marcus from the tournament in the first round of Kumite competition. The stunning defeat left Marcus sitting on the gymnasium bleachers in a state of shock and disbelief. He had invested months in intensive preparation, developed impressive technical skills, and maintained peak physical condition. Yet he had been eliminated from both divisions of the state championship tournament, achieving results far below his confident expectations, and suffering the most humiliating losses of his martial arts career. Master Chen approached his dejected student with the compassionate demeanor of an instructor who had witnessed many similar situations throughout his teaching career. He sat beside Marcus on the bleachers, allowing several minutes of silence before offering his perspective on the day's events. Defeat is often the greatest teacher in martial arts, Master Chen said quietly, his voice carrying the wisdom of decades spent observing the development of martial artists. Technical skill is important, but it must be balanced with proper mental attitude and respect for opponents. Today's results suggest that your preparation focused too heavily on physical techniques while neglecting the spiritual aspects of our art. Marcus struggled to process his instructor's words through the fog of disappointment and wounded pride. In his mind, he had executed techniques correctly and demonstrated superior physical abilities. The suggestion that his attitude and character had contributed to his defeats seemed like an attempt to rationalize what he considered unfair judging and bad luck. The drive back to Detroit passed in uncomfortable silence, with Marcus replaying the day's events and searching for explanations that would preserve his self-image as a superior martial artist. He concluded that the judges had been biased, his opponents had been lucky, and the tournament format had somehow disadvantaged technically superior competitors like himself. Monday evening brought Marcus back to Master Chen's dojo for the first training session following the tournament. He arrived late and moved through the warm-up routine with obvious reluctance, his body language reflecting the psychological impact of his unexpected defeats. The other students sensed his mood and gave him extra space during partner exercises. Robert Washington observed Marcus's demeanor during the evening cleaning routine, noting the dramatic change from the confident young man who had dominated training sessions just weeks earlier. The janitor's experienced eye recognized the symptoms of someone whose self-perception had been shattered by reality, creating an opportunity for either genuine growth or destructive bitterness. During a break in the training session, Marcus found himself alone near the equipment storage area where Robert was organizing supplies. The older man worked with his characteristic quiet efficiency, seemingly unaware of Marcus's presence. However, something in the young martial artist's defeated posture prompted Robert to break his usual pattern of remaining invisible. "I heard about the tournament results," Robert said gently, not looking up from his work. "Competition can be challenging, especially when the outcomes differ from our expectations. Sometimes defeat teaches us more valuable lessons than victory ever could." His words carried the tone of someone who had experienced both triumph and failure in ways that went beyond Marcus's current understanding. Marcus felt a flash of anger at receiving what seemed like condescending sympathy from a janitor, but his defeated emotional state prevented him from responding with his usual arrogance. Instead, he found himself engaging in conversation with Robert for the first time since their interactions had begun. "I don't understand what went wrong," Marcus admitted reluctantly. "My techniques were better than most competitors. My conditioning was superior, and my preparation was thorough. The judges must have been looking for something other than technical skill." His words reflected the confusion of someone whose worldview had been challenged by unexpected reality. Robert paused in his organizing to look directly at Marcus, his weathered face showing genuine compassion for the young man's struggle. "Technical skill is certainly important in martial arts competition," he replied thoughtfully. "However, judges and opponents often respond to qualities that cannot be learned through physical training alone. Character, humility, and respect for others create a presence that influences how techniques are perceived and received." The observation troubled Marcus because it implied that his attitude and personality had contributed to his tournament failures, possibilities he was not yet prepared to accept. However, the sincerity in Robert's voice and the obvious wisdom behind his words created the first crack in Marcus's defensive rationalizations. "You seem to know quite a bit about martial arts for someone who," Marcus began, then stopped himself before completing the insulting observation about Robert's occupation. For the first time, he noticed details about the older man that suggested experience beyond what his humble position might indicate. Robert smiled slightly at Marcus's unfinished comment, recognizing the young man's struggle between ingrained prejudice and growing curiosity. "I have been around martial arts for many years," he replied diplomatically. "Sometimes observation from the outside provides perspectives that active participants might miss. Your technical development has been impressive to watch, but martial arts encompasses more than physical technique." The conversation planted seeds of doubt about Marcus's previous assumptions, though his wounded pride prevented him from immediately accepting the possibility that his character flaws had contributed to his tournament defeats. The young martial artist returned to his training with slightly less arrogance than before, though the full impact of Robert's wisdom would require time to develop. As the weeks following the tournament passed, Marcus struggled with a crisis of confidence that affected every aspect of his training. His techniques remained sharp, his conditioning stayed at high levels, but his mental approach to martial arts had been fundamentally shaken by the gap between his expectations and reality. The defeat had forced him to confront the possibility that his preparation had been incomplete in ways he had never considered. Robert continued his quiet observation of Marcus's development, noting both the young man's ongoing technical skills and the subtle changes in his attitude that suggested potential for growth. The tournament defeats had created an opportunity for genuine learning, though whether Marcus would embrace that opportunity or retreat into defensive bitterness remained to be determined. December arrived in Detroit, with an early winter storm that blanketed Master Chen's dojo in a pristine layer of snow, transforming the familiar suburban landscape into something clean and new. The harsh Michigan weather seemed to mirror the cold reality that had settled over Marcus Thompson's martial arts aspirations following his tournament defeats 6 weeks earlier. His confidence remained shattered, his training lacked its former intensity, and his interactions with fellow students had become increasingly strained. The evening training session on December 15, 1978, proceeded with the usual rhythm of warm-ups, technique practice, and controlled sparring that characterized Master Chen's structured approach to instruction. However, Marcus's participation felt mechanical and detached, his movements technically correct, but lacking the passionate drive that had once defined his approach to karate training. During a break between training segments, Marcus found himself near the equipment storage area where Robert Washington was quietly organizing supplies. The janitor worked with his characteristic methodical precision, folding clean uniforms and arranging training gear with the same attention to detail he brought to every task. His presence had become so familiar that most students barely noticed him anymore. Something about Robert's calm demeanor irritated Marcus more than usual that evening. The older man's quiet competence and dignified bearing served as an uncomfortable contrast to Marcus's own internal turmoil. The defeated martial artist felt frustrated by his inability to understand what had gone wrong at the tournament, and Robert's philosophical comments during their previous conversations had only added to his confusion. Still trying to figure out what went wrong at the tournament, Marcus said with forced casualness, though his tone carried an edge of sarcasm that hadn't been present in their earlier interactions. I suppose someone like you wouldn't understand the complexities of competitive martial arts. It must be nice to have such simple responsibilities. Robert paused in his organizing, but didn't look up from his work. His weathered hands continued folding uniforms with practiced efficiency while he considered his response. Something in Marcus's tone suggested that the young man's tournament defeats had created bitterness rather than the growth opportunity that setbacks could provide. For those willing to learn from them, competition can indeed be complex, Robert replied evenly, his voice maintaining the respectful tone he used with all the dojo's members, regardless of how they treated him. Sometimes the lessons we need most come from experiences we least expect or want. Defeat often teaches more valuable lessons than victory, though those lessons can be difficult to accept initially. Marcus's frustration boiled over at what he interpreted as condescending wisdom from someone he considered unqualified to offer martial arts advice. The tournament defeats had wounded his pride so deeply that any suggestion of personal responsibility for his failures felt like an attack on his carefully constructed self-image. "That's easy for you to say," Marcus snapped, his voice rising loud enough to draw glances from nearby students. "You've never competed at a high level, never trained for months to achieve a specific goal, never put yourself on the line in front of judges and spectators. You just push a mop around and pretend to understand what real martial artists go through." The harsh words hung in the air like a physical presence, creating an uncomfortable silence among the students who had overheard Marcus's outburst. Several junior students looked shocked at the disrespectful tone their supposed role model had used toward the quiet man who had always treated everyone with courtesy and dignity. Robert straightened slowly, his full height more impressive than most people realized when he wasn't hunched over cleaning supplies. His dark eyes met Marcus's gaze with calm intensity, though his expression showed hurt rather than anger at the young man's cruel assessment of his understanding and worth. "You may be correct that I haven't experienced competitive martial arts in the same way you have," Robert said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that suggested depths Marcus had never bothered to explore. "However, I have learned that true martial arts extends far beyond tournament competition. Character, respect, and humility are tested every day in how we treat others, especially those we consider beneath us." The response only fueled Marcus's anger because it implied moral judgment of his behavior and character. In his current state of wounded pride and confusion, he interpreted Robert's gentle correction as presumptuous lecturing from someone who had no right to offer guidance to a black belt martial artist. "Don't lecture me about martial arts," Marcus said with venom in his voice. "You're a janitor. You clean up after real martial artists like me. Your opinion about character and humility doesn't matter, because you've never earned the right to have opinions about things you don't understand. Stick to mopping floors and stay out of conversations about subjects above your level." The cruelty of Marcus's words created a palpable tension throughout the training area. Students who had been practicing nearby stopped their activities to stare at the confrontation, shocked by the level of disrespect their fellow black belt was showing towards someone who had always been kind and helpful to everyone in the dojo. Master Chen, who had been working with advanced students across the training floor, noticed the disturbance and approached with the measured steps of someone accustomed to handling conflicts. His weathered face showed disappointment as he assessed the situation and realized that one of his senior students was publicly humiliating the man who had maintained their facility with dedication and professionalism for over 2 years. "Marcus," Master Chen said with quiet authority that immediately commanded attention from everyone within hearing distance, "I believe you owe Mr. Washington an apology. Your words are inconsistent with the principles we teach in this dojo and disrespectful to someone who has always shown courtesy to our students and instructors." The public correction from his instructor in front of the entire class further wounded Marcus's already damaged pride. Rather than recognizing the justice of Master Chen's intervention, he felt embarrassed and defensive about being called out for behavior that he still believed was justified by his superior position in the martial arts. Hierarchy, I was simply explaining the reality of our different positions here, Marcus said with forced respect toward his instructor while maintaining his hostile attitude toward Robert. I don't think it's inappropriate to clarify that a janitor shouldn't offer advice to black belt martial artists about subjects he doesn't understand. I was just being honest about our respective qualifications. Master Chen's expression hardened as he realized that Marcus's attitude problems ran deeper than a momentary lapse in judgment. The young man's tournament defeats had revealed character flaws that competitive success had previously masked, and his current behavior demonstrated that those defeats had produced bitterness rather than the humility that might have led to genuine growth. Your understanding of martial arts hierarchy appears to be flawed, Master Chen said with the firm tone he used when correcting serious errors in technique or attitude. Rank and achievement in competition do not give anyone the right to treat others with disrespect. Mr. Washington deserves courtesy regardless of his occupation, and your behavior tonight has been inappropriate and embarrassing to our school. The public rebuke from his instructor created a humiliation that Marcus found unbearable on top of his tournament failures. Rather than accepting responsibility for his behavior and apologizing to Robert as requested, he chose to double down on his position and justify his actions through further displays of arrogance. I understand that we should be polite to everyone, Marcus replied with barely controlled anger, but I also think we should be realistic about different people's qualifications to offer guidance about martial arts. I have trained for years, earned my black belt through demonstrated skill, and competed at state level. He mops flaws. I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that our perspectives on martial arts might carry different weight. Robert watched this exchange with the sad recognition of someone who had seen many, promising young people destroyed by pride and arrogance. He had hoped that Marcus's tournament defeats might create an opening for genuine character development, but the young man's current behavior suggested that he had chosen defensiveness and blame rather than self-reflection and growth. The confrontation had created a teaching moment that Master Chen would not allow to pass without addressing the fundamental issues it revealed about respect, humility, and the true purpose of martial arts training. However, he also recognized that Marcus's current emotional state made him unlikely to receive such instruction constructively. During a public confrontation, the following Monday evening arrived with temperatures dropping below freezing, creating ice formations on the windows of Master Chen's dojo that sparkled under the fluorescent lights. The harsh December weather seemed to echo the cold atmosphere that had settled over the training facility since Marcus Thompson's public humiliation of Robert Washington 3 days earlier. The incident had created an uncomfortable tension among students and instructors, forcing everyone to confront questions about respect, hierarchy, and the true meaning of martial arts training. Marcus arrived for the evening session with his usual punctuality, though his demeanor remained defensive and angry following Master Chen's public correction of his behavior. The young martial artist had spent the weekend rationalizing his actions and convincing himself that he had been unfairly criticized for simply speaking truth about the obvious differences between his qualifications and those of a maintenance worker. The training session proceeded with an artificial normalcy that fooled no one. Students moved through their warm-up routines and technique practice with less enthusiasm than usual, their conversations more subdued, and their interactions with Marcus noticeably cooler. The confrontation had revealed aspects of his character that many had suspected, but hoped were not as pronounced as they now appeared to be. Master Chen conducted the class with his usual professionalism, though his occasional glances toward Marcus carried disappointment and concern. The elderly instructor had hoped that the tournament defeats might humble his talented but arrogant student, creating opportunities for character development that would balance his obvious physical abilities. Instead, Marcus's behavior had grown worse, suggesting that pride and defensiveness were preventing the growth that setbacks should inspire. During partner exercises, Marcus found himself paired with junior students more often than usual, as his regular training partners seemed reluctant to work with someone whose recent behavior had demonstrated such disrespect for others. This subtle ostracism only increased his resentment and reinforced his belief that everyone was treating him unfairly because they couldn't accept harsh truths about social hierarchies. Robert Washington arrived for his evening cleaning routine with the same quiet dignity he had always displayed. Despite the cruel treatment he had received earlier in the week, his weathered face showed no signs of anger or bitterness, and his interactions with students remained courteous and helpful. However, observant individuals noticed a subtle sadness in his demeanor that suggested the wounds from Marcus's verbal attack had been deeper than his calm response had indicated. As the training session progressed, Marcus became increasingly frustrated with the subtle changes in how other students treated him. His techniques remained sharp, and his physical conditioning stayed at high levels, but the respect and admiration he had previously enjoyed had been replaced by polite distance and occasional disapproving glances. During a water break, Marcus overheard two junior students discussing his confrontation with Robert in terms that clearly criticized his behavior. Their conversation included observations about the difference between technical skill and true martial arts spirit, suggesting that his recent actions had damaged his reputation more severely than he had realized. "Maybe I should clear the air," Marcus announced to no one in particular, though his tone suggested confrontation rather than reconciliation. He approached Robert, who was quietly organizing equipment in the storage area, with the aggressive stride of someone seeking vindication rather than understanding. "I want to set the record straight about what happened last week," Marcus said loudly enough for nearby students to hear. "I wasn't trying to be mean or disrespectful. I was simply pointing out the obvious fact that a janitor shouldn't be giving martial arts advice to black belt competitors. That's just common sense, not prejudice or arrogance." Robert paused in his work and turned to face Marcus with calm patience, though something in his dark eyes suggested depths of experience that the young martial artist had never bothered to explore. "I understand that you believe your position gives you certain privileges and perspectives," Robert replied quietly. "However, perhaps you might benefit from learning more about people before making assumptions about their qualifications or background." The response irritated Marcus because it implied that his judgments might be based on incomplete information, a possibility that threatened his carefully constructed sense of superiority. "What's that supposed to mean?" he demanded. "Are you suggesting that pushing a mop around somehow qualifies you to understand competitive martial arts better than someone who has actually trained and competed?" Robert's expression shifted subtly, showing the kind of patient sadness that comes from watching someone make destructive choices, despite having opportunities to choose differently. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "you might be interested to know that I have some experience with martial arts competition, though admittedly from a different era than yours." The statement caught Marcus off guard because it suggested that his assumptions about Robert's background might be inaccurate. However, his defensive mindset prevented him from processing this information constructively. Instead, he interpreted it as an attempt to claim false expertise or minimize the achievements that defined his own identity. "Oh, really?" Marcus said with obvious skepticism and growing sarcasm. "So you're telling me that you've competed in karate tournaments, that you understand what it takes to train for months, perfect your techniques, and perform under pressure in front of judges and spectators? A janitor with tournament experience? That's convenient." Master Chen, who had been observing this exchange from across the training floor, approached with the concerned expression of someone recognizing that a critical moment had arrived. He understood that Robert's patient responses to Marcus's attacks had been more restrained than the situation required, and that the truth about the older man's background might provide the humbling lesson that Marcus desperately needed. "Marcus," Master Chen said with quiet authority, "perhaps you should listen more carefully to what Mr. Washington is telling you. Your assumptions about his background and qualifications may be less accurate than you believe. Sometimes the most knowledgeable people are also the most humble about sharing their expertise." The intervention from his instructor created additional confusion for Marcus, who could not understand why Master Chen seemed to be supporting Robert's implied claims about martial arts experience. In his mind, such support suggested either misplaced sympathy or some kind of conspiracy to make him appear foolish for stating obvious truths about social hierarchies. "With respect, Sensei," Marcus said, his tone carrying barely concealed frustration, "I think we should be realistic about this situation. Mr. Washington seems like a nice man, and I'm sure he's good at his job. But let's not pretend that cleaning a dojo gives someone the same understanding of martial arts as years of serious training and competition." Robert exchanged a meaningful look with Master Chen, and something in that silent communication suggested shared knowledge that Marcus had not been privileged to receive. The older man seemed to reach a decision about how much truth the young martial artist was ready to hear, though his expression indicated doubt about whether Marcus could process such information constructively given his current attitude. "Perhaps," Robert said with careful consideration, "it would be helpful for you to know that I spent 15 years competing in karate tournaments throughout the Midwest during the 1960s and early 1970s. My record included victories at state and regional levels, and I had the privilege of training under some of the first Japanese masters to teach in America." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow, challenging every assumption he had made about Robert's qualifications and background. However, instead of creating the humility that such information should have inspired, it initially produced defensive disbelief and anger that his worldview had been so dramatically contradicted. "That's impossible," Marcus said with desperate conviction. "If that were true, someone would have mentioned it before now. Master Chen would have introduced you as a former competitor. You would have been helping with instruction instead of cleaning floors. You're making this up to try to embarrass me for being honest about our different positions." Here, Master Chen's patient expression shifted to show disappointment in his students' inability to accept information that conflicted with his prejudices. "Actually, Marcus, everything Mr. Washington has told you is accurate. He was quite successful in tournament competition before you were born, and his knowledge of traditional karate is extensive. His current occupation reflects personal choice rather than lack of qualifications in martial arts." The confirmation from his trusted instructor shattered Marcus's defensive rationalization and forced him to confront the possibility that his treatment of Robert had been not only cruel, but profoundly ignorant. The young martial artist found himself in the unfamiliar position of having his fundamental assumptions about merit, respect, and hierarchy completely undermined by reality. The silence that followed Master Chen's confirmation of Robert's competitive background felt heavy and oppressive in the dojo's training area. Marcus stood frozen, his mind struggling to process information that completely contradicted his assumptions about hierarchy, merit, and the relationship between achievement and occupation. The revelation that the man he had so cruelly dismissed possessed extensive tournament experience and deep martial arts knowledge created a crisis that threatened his entire worldview. Robert Washington watched Marcus's internal struggle with the patient compassion of someone who had witnessed many young people grapple with the gap between their perceptions and reality. His weathered face showed no triumph or vindication, only the sad recognition that pride often prevented people from learning the lessons that could help them grow beyond their current limitations. "Perhaps," Master Chen said gently, recognizing that Marcus needed guidance to process this information constructively, Mr. Washington would be willing to share some details about his competitive career. His experiences might provide valuable perspective for current practitioners who are serious about improving their understanding of martial arts. Robert considered the request carefully, understanding that such sharing carried both opportunities and risks. His natural humility made him reluctant to discuss personal achievements, but he also recognized that Marcus's education might require exposure to realities that could challenge the young man's dangerous assumptions about worth and respect. "Began training in karate in 1960, Robert said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent in disciplined practice. "My instructor was one of the first Okinawan masters to establish a school in Detroit, and his approach emphasized character development alongside physical technique. I earned my black belt in 1963 and began competing in regional tournaments throughout the Midwest during the height of American karate's early development." Marcus listened with growing amazement as Robert described victories at major tournaments throughout Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois during the 1960s and early 1970s. The older man spoke modestly about achievements that included multiple state championship titles, regional recognition, and invitations to compete at national-level events that attracted the era's most accomplished martial artists. "I competed primarily in kata and kumite divisions," Robert continued, his tone remaining humble despite describing accomplishments that far exceeded Marcus's own competitive experience. The tournament format during that era emphasized traditional techniques and character demonstration, qualities that judges evaluated alongside physical ability. Competition was intense, but the emphasis remained on personal development and respect for opponents. The contrast between Robert's extensive competitive success and his current humble occupation created cognitive dissonance that Marcus found difficult to resolve. His assumptions about the relationship between achievement and social position had been so completely undermined that he struggled to maintain any coherent worldview. "Why didn't you ever mention this before?" Marcus asked with confusion that bordered on desperation. "If you were so successful in competition, why are you working as a janitor instead of teaching martial arts? Why would someone with your background choose such a different path?" Robert's expression showed understanding for Marcus's confusion, while also revealing depths of wisdom that came from years of reflection on life's priorities and values. "Success in competition is only one measure of a person's worth," he replied thoughtfully. "After my competitive career ended, I chose a different direction that allowed me to support my family while maintaining my connection to martial arts through observation and quiet practice." Master Chen nodded approvingly at Robert's response, recognizing the mature perspective that had guided his former student's life choices. Mr. Washington's approach to martial arts has always emphasized service and humility over recognition, he explained to Marcus. His decision to work here has allowed him to contribute to our dojo community while pursuing his own continued learning. The explanation challenged Marcus's assumptions about success and ambition in ways that made him deeply uncomfortable. His entire identity had been built around achieving recognition through competition and advancement in rank, concepts that seemed less meaningful when viewed through the lens of Robert's different priorities. "I still don't understand," Marcus said with obvious frustration. "If you had the skills and experience to be teaching martial arts, why would you choose to clean floors instead? Why would someone with your background accept such a position when you could have been an instructor or school owner?" Robert's patient smile showed compassion for Marcus's inability to comprehend perspectives that differed from his own narrow focus on status and recognition. "Perhaps," he suggested gently, "the question reveals assumptions about the relative value of different types of work and service. Every honest occupation has dignity, and my current position allows me to contribute to this community while maintaining humility about my past achievements." The response forced Marcus to confront uncomfortable questions about his own values and priorities. His treatment of Robert had been based on prejudices about occupation and social hierarchy that now appeared both cruel and ignorant. The realization that he had insulted and dismissed someone whose martial arts accomplishments far exceeded his own created shame that he found difficult to process. "I think I owe you an apology," Marcus said reluctantly, though his tone suggested that the words were difficult to speak. "I made assumptions about your background and qualifications that were obviously wrong. I shouldn't have been so dismissive of your knowledge and experience." Robert accepted the apology with gracious dignity, though his expression indicated that he understood Marcus's words reflected embarrassment rather than genuine understanding of the deeper issues involved. "Apology accepted," he replied simply. "However, the more important question might be what lessons can be learned from this experience about judging others and the relationship between achievement and character." Master Chen recognized that this moment represented a crucial opportunity for Marcus's character development, though he also understood that genuine change would require more than simply learning facts about Robert's background. The young man needed to examine his fundamental assumptions about respect, humility, and the true purpose of martial arts training. This situation provides an excellent example of why we emphasize character development alongside physical training, Master Chen observed. Technical skill without proper humility and respect for others creates the kind of problems we have witnessed here. Mr. Washington's example demonstrates how genuine martial artists balance achievement with modesty and service. The lesson stung Marcus because it highlighted character flaws that he had preferred to ignore or rationalize away. His tournament defeats and subsequent behavior had revealed aspects of his personality that contradicted his self-image as a dedicated martial artist worthy of respect and recognition. As the evening training session concluded, Marcus found himself isolated from his fellow students in ways that went beyond the physical distance they had been maintaining since his cruel treatment of Robert. The revelation about Robert's background had exposed the ignorance and prejudice underlying his behavior, creating shame that affected every aspect of his self-perception. Robert completed his evening cleaning routine with the same quiet efficiency he had always displayed, though observant students noticed a subtle change in how others interacted with him. Word of his competitive background had spread quickly through the dojo, creating new respect for someone whose humility had previously made his achievements invisible. The drive home through Detroit's snowy streets gave Marcus time to reflect on the evening's revelations and their implications for his understanding of martial arts, respect, and personal worth. He had spent months focused on his own advancement and recognition, never considering that true wisdom might come from sources he had dismissed as unworthy of attention. The comfortable assumptions about hierarchy and merit that had guided Marcus's behavior lay in ruins, replaced by uncomfortable questions about character, humility, and the true meaning of martial arts achievement. His cruel treatment of Robert now appeared not only morally wrong but profoundly ignorant, revealing character flaws that no amount of technical skill could overcome. As December continued toward the Christmas holiday, Marcus faced the challenging task of rebuilding his approach to martial arts training, with greater emphasis on the character development he had previously neglected. The lessons were painful but necessary, offering opportunities for genuine growth if he could overcome his pride and embrace the humility that Robert's example had demonstrated. The days leading into the New Year were marked by heavy snow and unusual quiet at Master Chen's dojo, a silence that mirrored the state of Marcus Thompson's mind. After the revelations about Robert Washington's past, the tournaments, the championships, and the humility with which he carried his achievements, Marcus found himself adrift, questioning everything he thought he knew about respect, merit, and true mastery in the martial arts. Training sessions at the dojo felt different now. Marcus approached practice with a subdued focus, performing kata and sparring drills, but without the arrogance that had previously defined his presence. Students, having learned of Robert's history and Marcus's humiliation, offered polite support but kept a respectful distance, unsure how to process the shift in dojo dynamics. One evening, Master Chen gathered the students for a short talk after class. The old instructor's voice was gentle but firm. Martial arts is not only about belts, trophies, or titles. It is about the way you treat others, the humility you show, and the lessons you accept with gratitude. His gaze settled on Marcus, his disappointment now mixed with hope. Later that night, Marcus waited for Robert as he finished his work in the equipment room. Marcus's apology was hesitant but sincere. "I was wrong to judge you. I thought titles and rank were all that mattered. Now I see that real respect comes from how you live, not what you win." Robert, with a small nod, accepted the apology. He replied with characteristic modesty, "True strength is admitting when you're wrong and choosing to grow from it. Sometimes, listening is a greater skill than any kick or punch." In the following weeks, Marcus worked harder than ever, not just on his techniques, but on helping others in the dojo. He paired with beginners, encouraging them with patience rather than pride. He stayed late to help with cleaning, quietly working alongside Robert and learning, through example, about humility and service. Gradually, his relationship with the other students thawed, and the atmosphere in the dojo began to heal. The dojo itself, grounded in Detroit's vibrant martial arts history, stood as a testament to the traditions brought from Japan and Okinawa in the post-war years. Traditions that taught integrity as much as fighting skill, and which had seen tournaments evolve from bloody blood and guts matches in the 1960s and 1970s to more disciplined, respectful contests by the end of the decade. By midwinter, Marcus had become a different person. He still trained hard, but now he listened carefully to advice from everyone, especially those without belts or rank. He sought out Robert's stories about the early days of karate in Detroit, discovering the roots of true mastery ran deep and often silent. Marcus began to understand what Robert and Master Chen had always known. Titles, tournaments, and black belts were only a small part of martial arts. The greatest victories happened quietly, inside. The new year of 1979 arrived in Detroit with a bitter cold snap that froze the windows of Master Chen's dojo in crystalline patterns that sparkled under the fluorescent lights. Marcus Thompson stood at those same windows before the evening training session, watching his breath fog the glass as he reflected on the profound changes that had occurred in his understanding of martial arts over the past months. The tournament defeats and subsequent revelations about Robert Washington had shattered his previous worldview, creating opportunities for growth that he was only beginning to recognize. The dojo felt different now, not in its physical appearance, but in the atmosphere that surrounded Marcus's presence. The other students no longer maintained the polite distance they had imposed following his cruel treatment of Robert. Instead, they had begun to include him in conversations and training partnerships, sensing the genuine changes in his attitude and approach to martial arts practice. Marcus arrived early for each training session now, using the extra time not for private practice aimed at personal advancement, but to help prepare the facility and assist junior students with their basic techniques. The work reminded him of Robert's quiet service, and he found himself understanding for the first time that contribution to the dojo community could be more meaningful than individual achievement. During technique practice, Marcus paired with white and colored belt students more frequently than before, offering encouragement and instruction with patience he had never previously displayed. His teaching reflected hard-won wisdom about the relationship between technical skill and character development, lessons that his earlier arrogance had prevented him from learning through normal instruction. "Your reverse punch is improving," Marcus told a nervous green belt student during partner work. "Remember that power comes from proper hip rotation, not just arm strength. Let me show you the movement slowly so you can feel how the entire body contributes to the technique." His tone carried genuine interest in the student's development, rather than the condescending superiority that had once characterized his interactions with junior practitioners. Robert Washington continued his evening cleaning routine with the same quiet dignity he had always displayed, though Marcus noticed that other students now greeted him with obvious respect and often lingered to ask questions about his competitive experiences. The janitor's responses remained humble and focused on encouraging others rather than celebrating his own past achievements. One evening in late January, Marcus approached Robert during a break in training. Carrying 2 cups of tea from the small kitchen area Master Chen maintained for students and visitors. "I was hoping we could talk," Marcus said simply, offering 1 cup to the older man. "I realize I still have a lot to learn about what martial arts really means, and I think you might be willing to help me understand." Robert accepted the tea with a slight smile that showed both surprise and approval at Marcus's gesture. "I would be honored to share what little wisdom I have gained over the years," he replied, "though I suspect you have already learned the most important lessons through your own experiences and reflection." They sat together on the bench near the equipment storage area, surrounded by the familiar sounds of students practicing kata and sparring techniques under Master Chen's guidance. The conversation that followed revealed depths of martial arts, philosophy that Marcus had never encountered during his years of technical training. "Competition taught me about determination and physical discipline," Robert said thoughtfully, his weathered hands wrapped around the warm teacup. "But the real lessons came afterward, when I had to decide what those achievements meant and how they should influence the rest of my life. Success can be as dangerous as failure if it prevents us from continuing to grow as human beings." Marcus listened with the intense focus he had once reserved for studying opponents' techniques, recognizing that Robert's words addressed questions about purpose and meaning that technical training alone could never answer. "I thought martial arts was about becoming the best fighter, earning recognition, and advancing through the ranks," he admitted. "I never considered that it might be more about becoming a better person." "Both aspects are important," Robert replied gently. "Physical training develops discipline, strength, and confidence that serve us well throughout life. However, without character development to balance those qualities, martial arts can create dangerous people rather than beneficial members of society. The true test of martial arts training is how we treat others, especially those who cannot defend themselves or offer us advantage." The wisdom resonated deeply with Marcus because it explained both his tournament defeats and his subsequent behavior toward Robert. His technical skills had been adequate for competition, but his character flaws had prevented him from demonstrating the spirit and humility that judges recognized as essential qualities in advanced practitioners. When the fall tournament season arrived, Marcus competed with a completely different mindset than had characterized his previous efforts. His focus remained on personal excellence and proper demonstration of martial arts principles, rather than on defeating opponents or achieving recognition. The results reflected this internal transformation. His kata performances earned consistent high scores, not just for technical accuracy but for the spirit and character that judges recognized as markers of genuine martial arts development. His kumite matches demonstrated skill balanced with respect for opponents, earning him advancement to regional competitions, where his reputation began to grow for the right reasons. More importantly, Marcus's behavior throughout tournament competition reflected the lessons he had learned about treating others with dignity, regardless of their rank, experience, or background. He encouraged fellow competitors, showed respect to officials, and accepted both victories and defeats with equal grace and gratitude. The story reached its conclusion on a cold December evening in 1979, exactly 1 year after Marcus's cruel treatment of Robert had created the crisis that ultimately led to his transformation. The dojo hosted its annual awards ceremony, recognizing achievements in competition, instruction, and service to the martial arts community. Marcus received recognition for his tournament successes and his development as an instructor, achievements that would have thrilled him beyond measure during his earlier period of competitive focus. However, he found greater satisfaction in watching Robert receive a special award for lifetime service to martial arts, an honor that acknowledged both his competitive achievements and his decades of quiet contribution to the development of others. As the evening concluded, Marcus stood beside Robert near the dojo's entrance, watching students file out into the winter night carrying with them lessons about respect, humility, and the true meaning of martial arts training. The partnership between the former arrogant competitor and the humble janitor had created ripple effects that would influence the character development of countless future practitioners. "Thank you," Marcus said simply, his words carrying the weight of genuine gratitude for the patience, wisdom, and forgiveness that had made his transformation possible. "You saved me from becoming someone I would have hated, even if I didn't realize it at the time." Robert's response reflected the quiet wisdom that had guided their entire relationship. "We saved each other. Your willingness to change gave meaning to my years of quiet observation and waiting for the right moment to share what I had learned. Sometimes the greatest victories happen when nobody is keeping score." The black belt, who had once mocked a janitor, now understood that true mastery in martial arts had nothing to do with tournaments, trophies, or recognition, and everything to do with becoming a person worthy of respect through character, humility, and service to others. His arrogance had indeed cost him everything, but losing everything had been the price of gaining what truly mattered.